Stupid AI tricks, a Devin video rant, Java 22 is released, some drama in the open source world, and the usual collection of silly toots, tweets, and other posts. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. Welcome, my name is Ken Cousin. On the Tales from the Jar Side channel, we try to tell you not just what happened, but why you should care and also when you shouldn't care. Let's take a look at this week's newsletter. So, it starts off as usual. Welcome, fellow jarheads, to Tales from the Jar Side, the Cousin IT newsletter for the week of March 17th through 24th, 2024. This week I taught the third week of my Spring and Spring Boot in 3 weeks course, and again I taught my Spring AI course on the O'Reilly Learning Platform, which was a bit of an adventure, but better than last time. They've made a lot of progress on the framework. I also had my regular meeting of my large-scale and open-source computing course at Trinity College in Hartford for undergraduates. Let me not skip the subtitle this time. The subtitle is 5 out of 6 scientists agree that Russian roulette is harmless. Oh, sigh. Yes, let's move on. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course video viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than your regular newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, please subscribe using the button on the newsletter or subscribe to the YouTube channel with the link there. Let's jump right in, shall we? So the first section is entitled Stupid AI Tricks. What happened is I finally put together that video that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. It's just taken me a while to get everything sorted out right. And I called it Stupid AI Tricks. And it was all about being unable to correctly count the number of letters and words in a sentence. And I'd been working on that, as I say, for weeks off and on. The production values were a little dicey. I had like 3 separate times when I meant to record a screen and forgot to hit the right screen record button, or didn't record a screen at all, or whatever. I mean, just silly mistakes because I was trying to use a different tool than usual, that Tella tool. With ScreenFlow, which is what I'm using now, I just record the screen and go. So we'll back to that. Let's take it easy this time. And then for the next technical video, we'll try to get fancy again. So there's some good demos in the video. I did use LangChain for J in general to load the Ollama testing environment, or the Ollama execution environment, and I tried 14, I think, different LLMs, although I also had a few in there, which I didn't show in the video, which were like, for example, ChatGPT-4 or Mistral or Claude, all of which they did fine. So the commercial tools did what they were supposed to do, but the open source ones here had a lot of adventures, especially the small ones. And of all those, the best fun was had with Tiny Llama as usual. So I finished that video back on Tuesday, uploaded it, and waited for the clicks to roll in and got 34. I mean, it just didn't get a lot. I don't know. I expected the algorithm to put it in front of more people who might be interested in something like that. I mean, I'm not blaming the algorithm. Apparently there's not the audience for that sort of thing that I thought there was. Okay. So, I mean, I thought this was kind of clickbaity, sure, but I thought there'd be a lot of people interested in that. But no, now that it's in the newsletter, of course, because I didn't advertise it on social media or anything, but now that it's in the newsletter and in the video, maybe more people will watch it. I don't know. So later in the week, I did something I've been thinking about doing for a while. Last week in the newsletter, you may recall, I had a bit of an extended rant on Devin, the AI software engineer from Cognitive Labs. So what I finally decided to do was extract that section of the newsletter video from last week, make it its own separate video, add a bunch of B-roll and other events in it, and then publish that as a separate video. And you can see here I gave it a nice little thumbnail and I called it I am become Devin, the destroyer of software jobs. See, it's got Devin the destroyer right on the front of it. Just figured, what the heck? I mean, it didn't take too long because I'd already recorded it. It was just a question of adding all the extras, which of course took longer than I expected because everything does. But I sent that out and that one did a lot better. I mean, it's got in the upper 70s, which again, it's not huge for me, but it'll rack up a few hundred, I'm figuring eventually. And Okay, great. I mean, so between the two, I kind of did something decent there. I guess the lesson I learned was sometimes what I think is going to be a clever idea is not something anybody's interested in, but maybe equally important, if I go on some kind of a rant in the newsletter, I might want to consider later in the week extracting that and publishing that as a separate video. And I can't just assume everybody's watching the newsletter and maybe they'll like that separate one. Who knows? We'll see. Maybe I'll do that. A couple weeks ago, I talked about retrieval augmented generation, so-called RAG, and I did some ragging on RAG. I mean, clever again, maybe. I may make a video on that. I may extract that from the one a couple weeks ago and turn that into a video, or I may record something from scratch. We'll see. Let's move on to the next section. The Tales from the Jar Side YouTube channel hit a milestone. As you can see here, I made it to 1,500 subscribers. Nice round number. I like round numbers as much as the next person. I still am very, low relatively speaking on the watch hours scale. In order to join the YouTube Partner Program, you need either 3,000 watch hours for the initial join or 4,000 watch hours if you want to participate in ad revenue or whatever else. I don't know that I'm even planning to charge anything, but hey, if there is ad revenue available, I might as well go as much to me as to YouTube, right? Any rate, I have about, 1,900 watch hours. I'm about 2/3 of the way to the initial program and about halfway to the overall one. We'll see. Who knows how long it'll take to get there. Fortunately, the more subscribers I have, the faster the watch hours accumulate. As I say, funny how that happens. Let's go to the next section. Also on, I think, Tuesday, Java 22, the latest fully released version of Java came out. So that's Java, of course, is on a 6-month release schedule, so we get a new version of Java every March and every September. And this one came out as 22. 21 is still the current long-term support version, but this is a full version of Java. And I do want to recommend the awesome JVM Weekly newsletter. They did, in fact, publish a very good special issue on that to talk about all the features in it. I do recommend that if you want all the details. I did go through it because he tends to talk about a lot of the under-the-hood stuff that doesn't generally directly affect me, so I don't pay as much attention to it, but I need somebody to explain it to me, and he's very good at that. I'll mention these few features of Java 22. I like the unnamed variables and the pattern variables. The idea there is that if you need a variable positionally in an argument list, but you're not planning to use it, you could just use an underscore, which says, yeah, I'm taking up that position, but I don't care. I'm not planning to use the variable inside the method, something like that. And patterns means the same thing inside of switch statements or instance of or what have you. Groovy has had that from the beginning. Kotlin has had that from the beginning. Nice to see that Java finally caught on. The string templates are still in preview mode. I've never been terribly wild about them, but there's a discussion that they're finally going to drop that so-called template processor, the capital STR dot part. If that's actually going to go away, I think that will improve them considerably. I'm still not thrilled by the fact they're using / curly brace instead of $ curly braces like everybody else does, but I can get used to that. I just never liked those template processors, and they supposedly are considering dropping that. Well, we'll see what happens with 23, I suppose. A really big feature, but still in preview, is this idea of stream gatherers, which is a way to allow users to define their own intermediate operations in a stream. Stream, the interface itself, comes with a lot of intermediate operations, methods that still return a stream, and terminal operations that return anything else. But you can't add your own methods or your own other processing mechanisms. A gatherer is an approach to doing just that. So still preview, so I'll look at the examples, but I'm not really going to dig into it until it is released, in fact. They also did a neat little demo in the JVM Weekly post talking about that in 22 you could start putting statements before the call to this or super inside a constructor. In constructors up until now, if you invoked another constructor in the same class with this, or another constructor in the super class with super, you couldn't put any lines before that. Now you can, as long as they don't require an instance of the object. That's not something I ever realized I needed, but in looking at some of the samples, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I could see how that might be useful. So we'll see. But again, it's a preview feature. So most of the things that came out are not really going to affect me. The only one I really kind of cared about was those unnamed variables. And that's not crucial. It's not worth upgrading just for that. In fact, I mentioned here of the 12 JEPs, the Java enhancement proposals that were accepted for Java 22, 8 of them were previews or incubators. The other released features, region pinning and foreign function and memory API and launching multi-file source code programs aren't really that significant for me. The launching multi-file source code programs I'll probably do as a demo in my latest features course. But the region pinning, that's under the hood, doesn't really affect me. The foreign function and memory API, however, triggered something for me in my memory. And that is, years ago, I used something called JNI, the Java Native Interface. And this was way back in the late 90s when Java was still shiny and new. And I was working in a systems and software group, and our goal was to put a GUI front end on a program that was processing elevator performance data. What it was trying to do was predict time to failure, something like that. So if they could anticipate failures, they might be ready for them before they happen or take them out of service or what have you. So the problem that we had, of course, was that the processing back then was done in Fortran. There was some MATLAB stuff too, but MATLAB had its own user interface. No, this was done in Fortran, and I didn't know anything that would put a user interface on Fortran. But I knew Java, so I thought I'd put a swing user interface on a Fortran program. And as I say here, you just can't get there from here. This is the image that DALL-E 3 generated when I said, give me a visual representation of the phrase, you can't get there from here. I mean, it turns out that to get from Java to Fortran, you have to go through C in the middle. So Java plus JNI goes to C, and then C would interact with Fortran, except that they were row-wise rather than column-wise in terms of processing of arrays. It was a mess. It was one of those cases where it worked on my machine and that was a real thing, but I couldn't imagine shipping it. This was the image that DALL-E generated when I asked it for a phrase. It worked on my machine. I'm not sure how that correlates, and that's really busy, but in fact, that's creepy on a number of levels. Yeah, let's just move on. So the old phrase that works on my machine eventually became, oh, then we'll just ship your machine, and thus Docker was born. That's the gag that people have been telling for years. To finish this section, I'm going to wait a little while before upgrading to Java 22 because I need to wait for IntelliJ and for Gradle to catch up, among others. Turns out I think IntelliJ is already ready to go, and Gradle, I got an announcement. I saw something yesterday, I think, that Gradle 8.7 supposedly supports Java 22. So I may have to give it a try sooner rather than later, which is fine. For the things that I'm doing for clients, though, I don't think I'm going to go past 21 for a while, and maybe 17 in general. We'll see. Next section. There was some drama in the open source community this week. I mean, that happens. It happens in any community, but in open source community, you hear about it. Well, the product known as Redis, I have a link here. This is the Redis database. They refer to it as an in-memory data store, which is a cache or used as a cache or as a vector database or many other things. Basically, the idea is that it collects keys and values, and it basically lives in memory, assuming you have a lot of memory. And I've used it, I don't know, a couple times. Yeah, in-memory data structures, as they say. A data structure server with support for strings, hashes, lists, sets, sorted sets, streams, and more. On and on. I used it in an example of test containers, I think, because they were doing it in a demo, and I thought, well, that looks interesting, so I got it to run once. I did have a friend on the No Fluff Tour who told me about a consulting gig he was on once, where the e-commerce site he was working with occasionally had flash sales where there'd be this giant sale for like the next 20 minutes, everything be on sale. And the problem is the transactions would come in at a much higher rate during that time. I mean, that's good. The problem was they didn't want to pay Oracle for the processing power that would be required to keep up with those transactions. And Oracle required lots of money for, basically on CPU and load and everything like that. So instead, what they did is they added a Redis data store to it and purchased just gigs and gigs and gigs of RAM to save it all, to store all those transactions. So during the flash sale, all the transactions, quote transactions, these are e-commerce transactions, not database transactions. Anyway, they would all go into Redis and they'd be stored that way. And then when the sale was over, they could migrate all of the transactions out of Redis and into their regular relational persistent database, into Oracle. And that worked really well for them. So it really brought home that no SQL really means not only SQL. Okay. Well, this week, Redis changed their license. It says starting with Redis 7.4, Redis will be dual licensed under the Redis source available license and the server-side public license. And I believe this was done because the Redis people were annoyed that certain clients, I think it was Amazon, were basically packaging up Redis and offering it as a service on their paid platform. So effectively, they were taking the open source work and just offering it for sale. Although I'm sure lawyers were involved, there was some way around the actual payments. So they tried to stop that. And unfortunately, they did that by putting in basically a closed source license. And the problem is the code was contributed by many, many developers worldwide who contributed with the understanding that it was open source. And you can't just close it without asking their permission or talking to them or giving them some sort of compensation or something. So the community went nuts. They had a bird. So these developers who might enjoy working in an open project didn't want to contribute to a closed project and certainly didn't like not being asked about it. Meanwhile, the people who ran Redis didn't want to be taken advantage of by giant conglomerates who could easily afford to pay for it, but weren't, found a way around it. So it's all a reminder to me that even on open source projects, there's money involved somewhere. I mean, an open source project that isn't funded means that developers are working on it on their spare time, and that means they'll do the interesting parts, and nobody wants to do the parts that nobody wants to do. Writing documentation, fixing broken features, backporting things to older versions, stuff that just people aren't excited about doing on their own, but they might do if they were being paid to do it, if it was their job. So either there has to be money to fund people directly, or there has to be money in the form of a company allowing their employees to work on it during company time, maybe because that way the company gets an in on the product itself. They have experts in-house, and that could be very useful. Or could be that there's money to be made from offering services or support in terms of that. When Sun, not yet Oracle, when Sun bought MySQL, the MySQL database, they paid $1 billion for a product that was open source. And the question is, well, what were they paying for? I mean, why would you pay for something you could just download for free? And the reason is what they were getting was all those support contracts. They had sold tons of support contracts that Sun would then build revenue from and offer paid support that way, for an open source project, for customization and training and consulting and all of those different features. By the way, that's partly how I got involved in the open source world. I haven't made terribly many code contributions, but I was always eager to make presentations about various open source projects that I liked, or support, documentation, or I've written books on several of these things. With the Groovy programming language, my book, Making Java Groovy, that was my first open source, my first book of any kind, actually. And it was based on an open source project, and the people in the community were very happy that I'd written it. So that gave me an in, And I used to give talks on the conference tour a lot before it became impossible to get a talk on Groovy accepted at a conference anymore. But impossible is a strong term, but right now, not so much. Well, at any rate, when there are no actual dollars involved, not a lot happens. When there are dollars involved, people are going to start to care about fairness. Who's being taken advantage of, who's being rewarded. I mean, there's always rewards, even if the rewards are in influence and contributions to the community and just feeling like you did something important or relevant that mattered to people. So there's always something. But when you get dollars involved, then we get this sort of issue. I remember also when Oracle tried to enforce ownership of that Hudson continuous integration server because the lead developer, the guy who did like 80% of the commits in the first few years, was an Oracle employee when he came up with the idea, so they assumed they owned it. So when they tried to enforce ownership, I think they tried to move the website into one of Oracle's home pages or something like that. The community routed around them. They just forked Hudson and created Jenkins, and now everybody uses Jenkins, and I don't know that most people even remember that Hudson exists at all. It's doable that way. LibreOffice was created as an open source variant of Microsoft Office. I'm currently working with GitLab, which is a common open source rival to GitHub, for example, and so it goes. What happened with Redis, of course, is it took a matter of hours before several open source forks sprang up. And we'll see, I'd mention them, but again, I'm not big in that community and I don't know which one's going to win. We'll wait and see how that evolves over time. But it was interesting drama, and I'll use it as a new case study for my Trinity students. Okay, let's go to the tweets and toots. This one kind of cracked me up, but I knew it would crack up my wife, so I had to include it. Use the Force. So Obi-Wan, Ani, Anakin. Ani's a girl's name. Why can't you call me something cool like Kin? Obi-Wan, use the Force, Kin. Ani is fine. That's terrible, isn't it? But okay. Next, science fiction versus fantasy. Sci-fi is when Hugo Weaving looks like this, and fantasy is when Hugo Weaving looks like this. So, of course, on the left, he's Agent Smith, and on the right, he is Elrond. So, Matrix versus Lord of the Rings. Yeah, okay, that's pretty clear separation of sci-fi versus fantasy. At any rate, it's a dated statement. I've seen that for years, but I thought this was nicely done. Next, beware the Ides of March. This post here said, it's all so commercialized now. Everyone forgets the reason for the season, which is stabbing tyrants. No one even says, et tu, Brute, anymore. It's all, do you want more dressing on that salad? And welcome to Chili's. Would you like to try our new Caesar salad wrap today? Rimshot. Yeah, okay. Moving on. I meant to include that last week, but everything ran long and I needed space for it. This was a comment from the Akasai Mastodon feed, echoed something from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Aeronautics Administration? Ocean and Atmosphere. At any rate, they posted saying a coronal mass ejection event occurred with a flare on the sun was detected and it was headed for Earth. They classified it as G2, which is moderate, saying it might make it to G3 strong. That was Sunday night into Monday. Rumor was it was actually going to hit G4 for a while, and still not a lot of danger, because that was, of course, everybody's question. Is it going to fry all our circuits everywhere? I mean, it could happen, just not on this one. I think it did make it to G4, but I didn't see any auroras last night, but we had a lot of clouds, so who knows. Okay. Next, spring is here. So it says, landscape open now. Spring is here. I'm so excited I wet my plants. Yes. Don't worry, it's good for them, I suppose. L. Gray had another great one. That image saying puberty hit ET like a brick. Wow, that's a scary image. I have no idea what that was supposed to be from, and I didn't even ask. I just liked the fact that I thought it was clever. I used to have hair like that too, but it's been a while. This one I labeled as profound. It says, people who jog on the roads in the dark, wearing dark clothing with no lights or reflectors, are a unique combination of a person who cares about their health and well-being and a person who doesn't care about their health and well-being. Holy dichotomies, Batman. Yeah, I mean, good point. And finally, a dad joke. Here's looking at you, Clid. Oh. I promise not to do any more Bogart impressions. Yeah, Euclid. Of course, is that Euclid? I mean, Euclid may or may not have existed, may have been a group of mathematicians back in ancient Egypt as, Greek mathematicians back then. Yeah, never mind. Let's just have a great week, everybody. And last week I did that Spring in 3 Weeks course, and I really enjoyed the Spring AI course. That went very well. I'm teaching at Trinity, and it looks like I'll be doing more of that in the future, more about that later. This week I have a Gradle course. It's been a little while, so we'll see how that goes as a no-fluff virtual workshop. And my Trinity course continues. So there'll be other events coming up. I'm in the middle of several career-altering events that I can't talk about yet, but I will let you know when they happen. So thank you very much. Hope you subscribe so that you won't miss any of those events. And, might as well just cue that theme song. Take care, everybody.
Hey there, devs, it's time to tune in to Tales from the Jar, so let's begin. Java, Kotlin, and Spring, oh my. Cookie, Gradle, don't be shy. Tales from the Jar side, oh yeah. Crack open the code, let's take a ride. From design patterns to the latest trends, your weekly tech talks that never end.